Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is a pleasant day in late July, and it's a little too pleasant to be making the podcast I'm making, I think, because I've come up with an idea for an episode that's wrapped up in something that doesn't apply right now, which is very hot temperatures. The last week or so has been very hot here in the United States. I recently read that this was the hottest week in history or something, in terms of recorded history. So not really surprising, but a bit of a bummer. And I thought I would take a walk up to the library to return some books and talk to you a little bit about some games. And I thought, what better theme to work with today than games about heat and hot places. So that's what I'm gonna do. I picked out a few games that are about heat and hot places, and I'll talk to you about them, and we can share an enjoyment of the conversation therein. So to start with, I was thinking about the worst heat for my money, which is sort of muggy heat, and one of the worst places I've read about. There's an excellent book called The Lost City of Z by David Grann, and in it we learn about explorers from the first half of the 20th century who went to the Amazon to try to find evidence of a huge city built by the indigenous people of the Amazon region in the era like either just colonial times or just before colonial times. In the book, toward the end, we learn that in fact there is strong evidence that there was a massive wooden city here. Of course, being mostly wooden, it's lost to the ages now, but the remnants of the earthworks are still there. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that there was, in fact, a massive city there. That said, the book is about this explorer who went looking for the city and ended up lost in the Amazon. I will admit I don't remember a lot of the details from that character or from the book. I don't remember the explorer's name, for instance. But what I'm talking about today is not the explorer. I'm talking about a game inspired by that explorer, and that is the game The Lost Expedition. The Lost Expedition is a game from Pierre Sylvester, published by Osprey Games. It's a delightful little solo or two-person game. I like it solo. I think it works great that way. And what you are doing is you are leading this expedition into the jungle to try and find the lost city. You do that, you pick out 3 adventurers, and you have a certain amount of food and health, and then you're playing cards that let you move further and further into the jungle, and you're trying to collect supplies and stay alive as long as you can. It's a sort of dark game because you just have to make it to the lost city to win. There's nothing about making it back out, which is of course kind of funny. But watching or looking at that book particularly reminding me, like when I encounter the dehydration card, or there's a card where like animal bite and it shows this like throbbing hand with a spider running away. Those moments remind me really strongly of the excellent work David Grann did in writing that book, and make you just think how hot and unbearable the jungle can be, particularly if you're not suited for it, and it seems like it drove them a bit mad. So it seems like a good one to talk about on a day when I'm trying to talk about games about heat. So, The Lost Expedition. Next up, I have 2 games about the desert. The desert is, of course, the epitome of hot places. The desert is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing there. It's dangerous even if you do know what you're doing there, particularly because you can get lost out there. The heat will be mesmerizing, can be confusing. If you don't know where to go to get water, you can find yourself trapped and really in trouble. So the 2 games that I was thinking about, one of these games is about being trapped, and one of the games is about the people who live in the desert. This is Through the Desert and Forbidden Desert. Let's start with Through the Desert. If you haven't played this is a Reiner Knizia abstract game themed around the desert. You have a map full of hex spaces, and on that map you have oases that are these trees that give you points, and then you have a bunch of little tokens here and there that give you points when you get them, and then you have the desert itself. The idea of the game is that each player starts with 5 different tracks of camels, and in your game you are going to be extending those tracks of camels through the desert. Your goal is to use tracks of camels to sort of block off pieces of the desert for your control. The bigger the piece of the desert, the more points you get. The idea of the game is that each player is trying to get points from collecting these tokens, from visiting oases, and from blocking off these areas on the map. Mixing those things together gives you a really nice blend of different mechanisms and different things to think about, and makes for a really interesting game. Like I said, it's themed around the folks of the desert, but it is really an abstract game that has a little bit of theme to help you understand what's going on, but it doesn't need to have it. I have the Fantasy Flight version that has the animal pieces that look like grandma's mints, so those are fun. I know there's a new edition out that's supposed to look pretty snazzy. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm sure it's great. If you get a chance to play through the desert, definitely do so. There's a reason Reiner Knizia's name goes above the title on most games that he designs. The other desert game I want to talk about is Forbidden Desert. This is the Matt Leacock game, the second game in the Forbidden something series from Game Right. In Forbidden Desert, you play the people who have built or who have landed in the desert in the place where there is an ancient civilization full of weird steampunk technology and the pieces of a ancient airship. Over the course of the game, you and your friends are going to navigate the desert looking for the pieces of the airship while also trying to hold back the tide of sand being created by a giant sandstorm that's swirling around and moving around. Every now and again, a sun beats down card will come up, and when that happens, if you are not under shade, you lose some of your water, and if you get too low on your water, you die, and the game's over. If any of the players dies, the game is over. So of course, you're also constantly looking for water. There are these oases. 3 of the 4 of them are real, but one of them is a dead well. So if you go there and you find the dead well, that's really frustrating if you needed the water very soon. It's a really interesting game. I like it much better than Forbidden Desert. It's a little harder, or Forbidden Island. It's a little harder. It's more of a everyone game rather than a sort of a game ideal for younger folks. At least once you're in the hobby. I mean, Forbidden Island is reasonably interactive and entertaining if you're new to the hobby. But once you've played a few co-op games, it is a pretty easy game to win until you get to the point where it's hard because of luck. And Forbidden Desert, I think, is a little more even that way and a little bit harder, which is fun. So, and of course, it's all about being hot, managing your heat, trying to find ways to avoid getting caught out in the sun when those cards come up, works really well. So that is Forbidden Desert. Next up, I want to talk about Evacuation. Evacuation is a Vladimir Suchy game in which you play leaders of 3 different large civilizations from one planet that's about to be consumed by its sun. And so you are leading your civilization to move to another planet that is more habitable. Over the course of the game, you're going to be rocketing ships back and forth, spending resources in both places to make the transition of as many of your people as possible. It's a kind of a dark game theme-wise because inevitably you can't get everybody from your home planet, but the idea is get as many as you can and hopefully keep those folks happy on the new planet. That said, the art on the game is really good in terms of imagining this heat. You have the image of the large and expanding star next to your original home planet, which is of course making everything hot and terrible, and so fits really well this theme of heat overwhelming everything. That said, it is probably the least heat-focused game on my list. The evacuation necessities come from this heat element, but again, probably the least applicable of the ones on my list. Nonetheless, it still feels related to heat. But that does lead me into my last game, which feels eminently relatable, and this is Daybreak. Daybreak is the recent Matt Leacock cooperative game, sort of his next step after Pandemic. In this game, you are building a tableau of cards, and you are using it to fight climate change in a variety of ways. Your goal is to get your country, you play either the United States, China, Europe, I think is the third one, and then the rest of the world is the fourth one. And what you're trying to do is bring into control the greenhouse emissions from those places and put into place social and civil structures and technological structures that help combat the changes due to climate change. As you go along, these changes get worse and you start to have environmental collapse, various kinds of environmental cascades So not only do you have to reduce your carbon emissions and actually get into a place called drawdown where you're pulling carbon out of the air, but you also then have to deal with the ramifications of these steadily increasing terrible tipping points. It is a sobering game to play because it's really a dramatic theme that is applicable. But it also is also hopeful. The whole game is full of these different technologies and different ideas that very smart people have been thinking about with regard to how do we try to make the world a better place for people to live in, and how do we try to rein back some of the ecological damage we've been doing. It's a really compelling and important part of the conversation about climate change. And every card has a QR code on it that you can scan and will take you to a page telling you about that technological idea or that social idea. The gameplay itself is really interesting. You have these tableaus of cards and you're putting out cards that give you tags, not unlike, something like Terraforming Mars. And then you have, at the bottom of each of your 5 stacks of cards, there is a power, and you can use the power on that card if you've got enough icons in that stack to activate it. And there's a lot of collaboration. The game doesn't have turns, it's just got rounds, and so everybody does work that they can, but there's a lot of ability to help one another. This is a game I've only played in Board Game Arena. I have not played it on the table yet. I'd be interested to try, and it looks really neat. So if you get a chance to play Daybreak, I recommend. It's really an interesting idea and something I'm looking forward to playing some more. So I have a couple honorable mentions that I wanted to bring up as I'm wrapping up the podcast here. In the line of Daybreak, there is CO2 and CO2 Second Chance. These are Visal Lacerda games about climate change, but also about being companies that depend on carbon emissions and thinking about how to maintain economy without destroying the planet. I haven't played them, and they aren't the best rated of his games, but it would be a game to play if you're interested in thinking about heat or climate change. From a more science fictional point of view, the game Anachrony also imagines a world where the environment has gone out of control and heat has become an issue. Water becomes the currency of the game because things are so dire for people. Although it's possible that that's just processed water or clean water is the hard part to get, rather than that the world is so dry everyone needs water. Lastly, the 2 other games I thought about mentioning but didn't for various reasons are Heat, Pedal to the Metal, which is a game about car racing in which you're literally managing how much heat is going into your engine. And then Scoville, which is a game about growing peppers. And I bring this up, of course, because Scoville is a measure of how hot peppers are, and the Scoville scale is one of the ways they talk about what peppers are and how they work. So the game Scoville is all about heat as well. Well, that's my take on some games about heat. It's a hot time right now, and these are hot games. Oh, one other honorable mention, of course, Pompeii. Pompeii is a great little tile layer in which you're doing a little area control and you're trying to get different stuff accomplished with your people. It's also about the city of Pompeii getting overrun by a volcano. So it's got this little volcano you get to throw people in. That's kind of fun. So that's it for my thoughts on heat and games about heat. I hope that you've enjoyed this rumination, and I'd love to hear what games come to your mind from your collections when you think about playing games about the heat. Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share your thoughts there, or send me a message. Wombat929 is my username on Board Game Geek. Brendan at Rattlebox Games is my email for this podcast. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.